Hello, welcome back to Learn Economia. We have given a very brief background of the various consumption theories. So, in the previous video itself, I've told you that I'll be doing a video separately on various consumption theories. So, in this particular video, what we are doing is that we will be looking into the main four consumption theories in the arena of macroeconomics. We'll be looking into the absolute income hypothesis, the relative income hypothesis, permanent income hypothesis, and also we'll be looking into the life cycle hypothesis. So that is the subject matter of this video. Having said so, let's get started. To start with absolute income hypothesis, this is actually a theory which is put forward by John Maynard Keynes. This consumption function is actually very much key to the arena of macroeconomics, and he has given his work, Keynes has given his hypothesis in his famous book, The General Theory. So what he has done is that he has tried to establish a relationship between income and consumption. He says that income is something which influences consumption, or in other words, consumption depends upon income. So we have to understand in which way consumption is depending upon income or dependent upon income. While Keynes offered no precise functional formulation of propensity to consume, his analysis, it is come to be known as the consumption function. That too, his famous psychological law of consumption is very much important in the arena of macroeconomics, and we will be discussing everything in this video. The absolute income hypothesis, it has got four different propositions, and this is mainly with respect to the average propensity to consume and marginal propensity to consume, where your MPC is a change in the real consumption for a unit change in your disposable income. When I say disposable income, it means that the income after deducting your tax, that is disposable income. So MPC means that the change in your consumption as a result of change in your income, okay, in your disposable income. And also the APC, it stands for the average propensity to consume, which is the ratio of consumption to the real disposable income. We are not looking into change, whereas in the case of MPC we looks for change. Okay, now Keynes assumes that consumption function, that too the real consumption function, it is a stable function of the real disposable income. Here we are taking both the consumption as well as the disposable income in real terms, not the nominal terms. That means that we are taking into consideration the effect of prices as well. So we are looking into that to see how the real consumption is influenced by real disposable income. And also he assumes that MPC is a positive fraction, and MPC is here less than APC, and APC decline. When is MPC is less than APC? When there is a decline of APC as income rises, MPC is less than APC. Okay, that means that the MPC would decline as the income rises. The marginal change in consumption can decline as the income rises. Okay, and the common representation of this absolute income hypothesis is that it is a linear function. Okay, that means that the consumption is a linear function of income. Um, the formulation given by Keynes with respect to the absolute income hypothesis has been questioned by many economists. Kuznets in 1946, he has given an empirical work, and it found support for it found some contradictions, and which is then known as the Kuznets hypothesis, and Kuznets issue with respect to this consumption arena. We can understand that the early empirical work, the one done by Keynes and many of his supporters, had supported the absolute income hypothesis by supporting that the average propensity to consume would fall as the income rises. But what happened is that when we look into the long run data, there appears to be some kind of contradictions. The absolute income hypothesis works well for the short run data, but when we go for the long run data to see whether it is supporting the absolute income hypothesis, we could see that there exists contradictions, and this indicates that the APC out of the disposable income, it is varying with the rise in the income over the long run. Okay, that means that it did not fall as disposable income rose, as what is predicted by the absolute income hypothesis of Keynes. The examination of household budget data by Friedman and all, it too revealed that the cross-section consumption function have a positive intercept, which has got a positive intercept and a lower MBC and APC in some given year. So they looked into both the long run data and short run data, and they could see that there exists some kind of contradictions. And when they also looked into the time series data and as well as the cross section data to see how the absolute income hypothesis could be fitted into these data, and they could see that there exists some kind of dilemma, and this errors of how to reconcile the long run proportional consumption function with the short run non-proportional consumption function. Right. So we have seen that the absolute income hypothesis, it establishes a positive relationship between consumption and income, and also the data suggests that two variables in the long run disobey this kind of relationship, and there exists some kind of irregularities in the long run. The absolute income hypothesis consistently unpredicted the consumption for the mid 20th century. So this is where the contradiction comes. And why there is contradictions? This could be explained by using certain reasons, and during and immediately after the Second World War, what happens is that there exists some increases in income, and this increase could not be translated to increased expenditure. Why? It is because there was rationing, there was forced holdings, there was many other things happening in the economy. As a result of that, even though there was an increase in income, this was not converted into increased expenditure. So short run and cross section analysis says that the APC exceeded the MPC, and why it happens is that the assets and also the wealth, it could be all these could be considered as significant for consumption, because all these things would be influencing your consumption, and this would give rise to modern theories of consumption such as the life cycle hypothesis, permanent income hypothesis, etc. We'll be looking into all these things in this video in detail. Okay. Having said so, we are moving to the relative income hypothesis. So we have seen that the absolute income hypothesis put forward by Keynes says that there exists a positive relationship between income and consumption, and also consumption is a fact. It is something which depends upon income. When your income increases, consumption increases, but by a lesser proportion, right? So this is what the consumption absolute income hypothesis says, and this is not the psychological law of consumption by Keynes. And also after several other studies, we could see that the absolute income hypothesis could be it is applicable only in the short run, and there exist contradictions in the long run, and as a result there were many attempts to reconcile both the short run non-proportional relationship of consumption and income with the long run proportional relationship of consumption and income, which later came to be known as the Kuznets hypothesis. And having said that, we are moving to the relative income hypothesis, which is a very famous work, which is actually a very famous work of James Dusenberry. He was the one who proposed this particular hypothesis, and he had published this work in his Income, Saving and Theory of Consumer Behavior, which was published in 1949. Okay. This hypothesis says that the satisfaction or the utility which an individual would be getting from consuming a particular commodity or from his consumption, so her consumption, this is something which depends on its relative magnitude in the society. That means that when we are not looking into our consumption at present, we are looking into the relative change in the average consumption. So there a slight difference is there with respect to the absolute income hypothesis. The relative income hypothesis says that we are relating our consumption proportion to something else. And what is there something else? We'll be answering that question in this video. So we have seen that somebody has published his work, and while he was doing that, while he was publishing his work, he also wrote about John Maynard Keynes, and this was based on a hypothesis that individuals consume a decreasing and they save an increasing percentage of their income as income increases. Okay, and we have seen that the absolute income hypothesis was tested by using both the cross-section data, the time series data, etc. And here we could see that the pattern observed in the cross-section consumption data, that means that at a given point, the rich in the population saved a higher proportion of their income and the poor did a lesser proportion. Right. However, the Keynesian theory was contradicted by other empirical problems as well. We have seen all these things in the previous discussion. Coming back to the theory proposed by Duesenberry, we could see that what he has done is that he has argued that the relative income hypothesis. This is something which could account for both the cross-section data as well as the time series data, because both these evidences could be used to prove the relative income hypothesis. Here we could see that an individual's utility, the utility that a person gets as a result of his consumption, this is something which depends on the ratio of his consumption to the weighted average of consumption of others. So we are relating our consumption with the consumption of others, and we are comparing our consumption with the consumption of others. And he says that, somebody says that our consumption pattern, our consumption behavior is something which depends upon the consumption pattern or the consumption behavior of others. We are actually imitating others. We try to imitate others, and that is one of his major contribution, that is demonstration effect. If we see that our neighbors are buying a costly item, we also will try to buy that costly item, because we have a tendency to imitate others. So he has driven two important conclusions out of his theory. What he says is that aggregate saving is something which is independent of the aggregate income, and this is consistent with the time series evidences. Okay, and the second proportion is that, or the second conclusion is that the propensity to save of a particular person is an increasing function of his income distribution, and which is consistent with the cross-section evidence. Here also we could see that many economists have tried to see whether his data, whether Duesenberry's theory could be fitted into some other data. And we could see that the life cycle hypothesis of Modigliani and also the Milton Friedman had a different version of the theory, just known as a permanent income hypothesis. And we will be explaining all these things in detail in this video as such. So these two are actually some closely related theories which imply that the consumption is an increasing function of the expected lifetime resource of a person. And if you look into the 1970s and all, the starting of 1970s, during that time, there was some inability of many theories to explain some puzzling empirical observations, right? So some people are telling one thing where some others are trying to test this theory by using a different set of data, and they are getting a different result, and as a result there is a contradiction. So all these kinds of things were happening during 1970s and all. In 1974, Richard Easterlin, he found that by looking into the self-reported happiness of individuals, and this is something which varies directly with the income at a given point of time, but the average well-being, it tends to be highly stable over time. Okay, despite the change in the income or despite tremendous income growth. Easterlin has told that these kind of patterns are consistent, and as a result, there were many other researchers which came in this regard. Uh, then after that, there was Andrew Oswald in 97. He has accumulated some evidences to support the claim put forward by Easterlin. The relative income hypothesis also found some corroboration from the indirect macroeconomic evidences. One of these is observation that the higher income growth rate lead to higher saving rate. Okay, then Christopher Carroll, uh, uh, David Beale, or etc. They try to explain this observation with a growth model, which says that preferences depends negatively on past consumption of an individual. Okay. Then there was another empirical observation, which is considered to be a little problematic for the life cycle of permanent income hypothesis, which states that the observed difference between the return on equity and the return on riskless assets, so there is a wide difference. Okay. So this is something which is very large to be explained with a plausible specification of the theory. And relative income hypothesis to give some other version. We'll be looking all these things in this video. Relative income hypothesis is actually a special case. We'll be looking that in very detail in this video itself. So uh, coming that sorry, relative income hypothesis is what we have discussed. Okay, now coming into the permanent income hypothesis, the next theory. This is the one put forward by Milton Friedman. He's known as the father of monetarism. He says a wealth is plays a very important role in influencing your consumption. Not only wealth, there have been many other factors as well which influences your consumption pattern. Under the assumption that this is under the assumption the household is infinitely lived. It is permanent income could be defined as the level of income which is received in perpetuity. Okay, perpetuity. Equivalently, permanent income, which is denoted as YP, this is regarded as the amount which is believed to be used for consumption, right? And you have to see that the in your income, it has got both a permanent component and a transitory component, and also as a result of this your consumption will be having two components, a permanent component and a transitory component. The permanent income hypothesis, it says that consumption in a use sense through the enjoyment or destruction of consumer goods by use rather than the expenditure upon them, so that consumption is regarded as service flow. Okay. Then we could see that irregular income will not result in unplanned consumption. That means that if you have a planned income, you know that you will be getting this much income in the future. As a result, you will be planning for your consumption. So your whatever income you can plan, whether it is happening in the future or whether it is happening in the past or present or whatever it may be, you will be having some idea in your mind that you will be getting this much income or you are getting this much income, right? So as a result, you will be able to plan your income, plan your consumption by using that. Friedman has defended this assumption. He argued that the transitory income changes are likely to be reflected in the asset holdings as well. So it is not only your permanent income that is used for purchasing assets, but you are using your transitory income as well. Moreover, he says that there is such a zero correlation, and this zero correlation, that means that since the consumption definition includes only the flow of services from goods, transitory income dispersed on durable goods might be classified as unplanned savings. And zero correlation here implies that average association is zero and positive association in many cases might be offset by negative association in others. And we could see a formal relationship between consumption and income, and we have been seeing the very same from the very beginning of this video. Whether it is a theory put forward by Keynes or Dusenberry or Friedman, we could see that consumption is something which depends upon income, right? We could see that Dusenberry told that at the level of household permanent consumption, sorry, Milton Friedman told that at a level of household permanent consumption is a proportionate function of permanent income. Okay. And the aggregate consumption is a function which depends upon the distribution of the factors across household. And there have been many other factors like your wealth, your assets, etc., influencing your consumption. So, if it is further assumed that distribution of household by income is independent of their distribution by many other factors, then aggregate permanent consumption obeys a simple proportional relationship to the permanent income. And this relationship it could be reconciled with the non-proportionate aggregate relationship as well. And as a result, the low income bracket which include a greater proportion of household with negative transitory income, and high income bracket including a higher proportion of household with positive transitory income, without any impact on consumption. What happens is that the proportionate permanent income relationship will be what to say, the proportionate relationship of permanent income with the consumption will be to an extent unshaken. But we could see that the observed consumption income relationship is shallower than the underlying proportional relationship between the permanent components. More specifically, for zero mean transitory components, the random transitory income distribution, the cross-section average income group consume cross-section average permanent income. Coming to the asymmetric incidence of transitory income, this is something which generates an observed consumption income relationship, and that is disproportionate. Over time, as aggregate average permanent income grows along the trend, we could say that the cross-section consumption function shifts, and this necessitates the use of proxy, some kind of proxy or means of estimating permanent income. Coming to the empirical implementation of permanent income hypothesis by using some time series data, what Freeman has done is that he has utilized an adaptive mechanism to relate both income of past and present with the greatest weight attached to the current income and declining weight attached to the past income. And this approach, with some truncation of truncation of influence of past income, enabled to estimate the weight attached to the current income in contributing to the permanent income at around 1/3. Okay, and this is some infinite distributed lag formation of permanent income, and this might not be expressed equivalently in terms of the finite adaptive expectation representation. We can also see that here too many economists have made their suggestions, and Koik transformation is considered to be one of it. And the definition of permanent consumption as the difference between measured and transitory consumption is put forward by many people, and it is then plausible to express the current measured consumption as a fraction of current measured income, right? An ensuing criticism of permanent income hypothesis is basically uh, related to the assumption of the adaptive relationship between permanent and measured income. The essence of rational expectation hypothesis is that the agent should use all the relevant and available information. And why it is done is that they are trying to avoid systematic errors. And here, the incorporation of the rational expectation hypothesis into the permanent income hypothesis has considerable ramifications. Also, the available empirical evidence is not generally supportive of this proposition very strictly. If you're looking the theory from a policy perspective, you will be able to see that permanent income hypothesis says that the current income plays only a minor role in consumption determination. In particular, the conventional Keynesian demand management policy, it might be conducted through the counter-cyclical fiscal policy in the form of temporary income tax changes, right? And the transitory income movements are very much reflected in saving changes. Income system is consequently inherently more stable in that the income expenditure multiplier effects of exogenous changes are deducted. Okay, however, we can see that policy discussion is something which is grounded in certain hypotheses like the permanent income hypothesis, and this is something which is concerned with consumption as a flow of services as well. Okay, so when we say consumption, it doesn't mean that consumption of goods alone. It implies consumption of services as well. While the transitory income component has made certain movements which are reflected in the savings and asset changes, such asset would be including durable assets as well. So we have to understand the implications of transitory income as well as permanent income on our consumption pattern. That our consumption would be including consumption of goods, consumption of services. Among consumption goods, we'll be consuming necessities, comforts, luxuries, and also we'll be consuming durable goods, non-durable goods, semi-durable goods, all these kinds of goods, right? So the issue of counter-cyclical policy effectiveness would become one of the determining one form of the recommendation and associated expenditures, right? So we need to take into consideration the factors which would be affecting our or influencing our consumption factor. The permanent income hypothesis embodies the assumption that the capital markets are perfect in the sense that lenders are prepared to extend credit on the basis of repayments financed under their future income, which is yet to be received. So, but we need to understand whether the capital market is perfect is, is something which is questioned, right? Because perfect competition is something that is very much difficult to see in the practical life, and perfect competition is assumed to be the ideal form of market structure. And one of the important assumptions here is that all the products are homogeneous, and it is very and there is no product differentiation as well. But in the real world, it is very difficult to find product homogeneity. There is product heterogeneity in the real world market structure. So, in that sense, it is the theory has been criticized. In many circumstances, increase in the current income is likely to be used to finance increased consumption, and this is something that is seen in the present life as well. And here, the income consumption relationship. By looking into that, we will see that whether this consumption income consumption relationship, present income is used for future consumption or not, or the entire income is spent for the current consumption alone. All these kinds of things should be answered. With that, we are moving on to the final thing, that is the life cycle hypothesis, which is put forward by Franco Montigliani. And this is actually saying that individuals, when they try to maintain a stable level of consumption over time, they will feel safe in their working years for retirement. That means that their consumption pattern, their lifetime consumption pattern is something which depends upon their lifetime income. So as a result, their lifetime resources rather than their current income is what determines their lifetime consumption. Okay. Here the implication is that this theory is set in part from the prevailing Keynesian theory at the time, and we know that absolute income hypothesis assumes that saving income ratio was determined by the level of income. Montigilani is a person who put forward a very new idea with respect to the income consumption relationship, and what is the way forward from the absolute income hypothesis to life cycle hypothesis. You can see that the absolute income hypothesis is put forward by Keynes, and this one, the life cycle hypothesis put forward by Modigliani. Keynes, he observed that the aggregate consumption was determined by the current income alone. here we are looking into the effect of the lifetime income, right? And the theory of savings was not formally developed by Keynes' general theory, but it could be derived from the consumption function, because the income is spent for both consumption and saving. Whatever is not spent for consumption is saved, and whatever is not spent for saving, it is consumed. And this is what we believe, right? And this is what we assume in economics theory. And this implication was later found to be having some kind of contradiction with the empirical evidence, especially from the especially when we look into the U.S. economy, because the U.S. national income data accounts did not show any kind of rise in consumption or rise in saving rate over time, and not this did not reveal any kind of saving for the rich country. In 54, what Modigliani done is that he has articulated the life cycle hypothesis, which he called the Bromberg. Okay, and in this framework, he says that a household makes its consumption and saving decisions at a time which is based on his lifetime resources, his lifetime wealth, his lifetime income, and with the added assumption that the consumers prefer a stable pattern of consumption, it could be shown that consumers must save their productive years for consumption after retirement. Till the time when you get a job, you are actually saving. Your needs and wants are financed by borrowing, or somebody else would be financing all these kind of things. But once you get a job, you will be earning, right? So you are earning income. You are able to make your own consumption, you are able to meet your own consumption needs, and also a part of your income would be saved. And after your retirement, if some people will be getting pension or retirement benefits, whereas some people, if you have worked in the private sectors and all, it is very much difficult to get pension. As a result, what you have to do is that you have to use your past saving, and here too you are going for the saving. So, in the life cycle hypothesis setting, consumption at any period does not depend on the current income, but it is depending upon the lifetime resources. This is in contrast to the traditional theory. We have seen we have seen the theory of absolute hypothesis put forward by Keynes, Perman hypothesis put forward by Friedman, relative income hypothesis put forward by Disenchantment. So, in none of these hypotheses, we have seen that it is the lifetime income that influences the lifetime consumption, right? Or the lifetime income which influences our present consumption. A change in the level of permanent income in the case of permanent income hypothesis, this is something which affects the level of consumption much more than the transitory component. And we have to understand that the two sources of economic growth in an economy are population growth and productivity growth, and both should move together, or else the productivity growth should be more than the population growth for the economy together. Some of the implications of life cycle hypothesis are actually counterintuitive. That means that saving in an economy is not affected by per capita income. So that is very much difficult to happen, right? The saving is something always which depends upon your income. And when the wealth income ratio is constant, the saving rate depends entirely on your growth rate. And this particular hypothesis, life cycle hypothesis, predicts that the wealth income ratio is decreasing function of growth and is influenced by the typical length of the retirement in the economy. To what extent we can extend this one or life cycle hypothesis is that it actually emphasizes the role of growth in saving determination, and this kind of extension enhances the explanatory power of this model. It is not generally considered as a part of supporting caste, and it could be extended to bequest, wealth income ratio, etc. We can see that this life cycle hypothesis could be extended to a situation of uncertainty of future income, because we cannot predict, especially for the people who are working in the private sector and all, we cannot predict that they will be getting some income in the future. They can lose their job any time. If there is any kind of recession or depression in the economy, these people who are working in the private sector, they will be affected the most, right? So they have very high probability to lose jobs. But we cannot predict that the recession or depression will happen in the economy. That is unpredictable. Or even if we could predict the time at which this happens is something which is unpredictable. So all these things should be taken into consideration while we are going for understanding these kinds of theory. In reality, the government has been going for many programs, whether it is a government of our economy or whether it is a government of some developed economy, whatever it may be. The government is going for many programs, right? All these things are done for the welfare of its citizens. The net result is very much unclear from a theoretical perspective. Ignoring all these kinds of programs will lead to some kind of biases analysis of the theory. And liquidity constraints is something which prevents the household from borrowing. As a result, when there is some constraints for borrowing, this could be influencing their consumption pattern. Why they are borrowing? To meet their consumption, they are borrowing. And if they are not getting money, that means that their consumption plans are hampered. Even though they have plans, they cannot execute their plans. And in the periods of high inflation and all, this would be causing the consumers to overestimate their real income, and as a result, this will lead to undersaving. Right? Your real income means you are taking into consideration the level of prices in the economy. As a result, if you are able to see that the prices are very much high in the economy, you have to spend a lot of your income for your consumption. As a result, you will be saving less, or you are not going for any kind of savings. So inflation plays a very important role there. Coming to the empirical evidence from the United States and also some gross country studies with respect to the life cycle income hypothesis. This hypothesis lends itself with some kind of implications of policies which are designed to influence the private consumption as well as saving. And coming to the interest rate policies, this would be affecting the permanent income through the asset return variable directly and through the impact on housing price, stock market prices, etc. Stock prices, etc. Now, coming to the researchers in 1960s, you can see that the private wealth in the US and the national income accounts for many organizations for economic cooperation and development, that is OECD. The countries in OECDs first became available accounted for low saving income ratio in the US when we compare these countries with the poorer countries. Okay. Despite challenges, this theory, the life cycle theory, has become very successful in explaining the saving behavior with respect to cross action as well as time series data. But if you are looking into the case of bequest and all, bequest, deficit finance, all these things increases with the current generation, permanent income at the cost of future generation. Whenever you look into a theory, you have to understand whether it is still practically applicable in the with our current data. So that's all for today. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos, and you can be a part of my Telegram group and Telegram channel to discuss your doubts. I'll be providing the links of both my Telegram group and Telegram channel in the description box. That's all for today.